Now we're to the place where our hexagon halves are completely done. We've joined them at the shoulder seam right here, and then I've added 2 more rounds after the join of the shoulder seam. Here's where I turned and then started my rounds, and then I had two additional rounds after that. This first round meets up with the hexagon itself, and then I added 2 more rounds before then we went to the next step. So I've added all of those rounds, and both of my hexagons are now ready to have additional length. If you're making, you saw where mine comes down just below the tush. It's more tunic length. So you predetermine how long you want yours. So here is the last corner of my hexagon, and here is the one additional row right here that I added. And now we're to that last row that we added, and I'm going to come across with then horizontal rows to add that length. But another thing that we do in this area is if we need additional width to ease over our hips, then this is where we do it. And it's a simple thing to do, but you must do it gradually. I'm going to lift my garment up, and you'll notice here there is an increase where you have 2 stitches in 1 stitch. You add those gradually. You'll see a little later, here's another increase, but it's some distance away. In fact, I do it formulaically. I have counted my stitches. I know how much ease that I want to have in this entire length. You don't add all of the width that you're going to add. You don't add it all in one row. You must gradually add it. If you add it all in one row, you'll get something more like a peplum. It'll stick out. And so you add it gradually, and I'll show you how to do that. And I'm looking for another, here's another place that I increased on that first row. And then there should be one more. Yes, one more right here. And perhaps you're asking yourself, well, then how many stitches do I add per row? As I said, I'm very formulaic. But before we get to that, you need to determine roughly by measuring your rows. Now, those of you who have decided that you're ending your sweater right where your hexagons and your additional rows for width end, then you can fast forward to the ribbing and the trim if you're and adding on your daisy squares if you're adding those things, because we have so many options with our hexies. Okay, what I did, I had already predetermined that I wanted this to come down and cover my tush. And so I'm measuring my rows, and they're not quite an inch in height. My actual rows of double crochet, they're not quite an inch. They're about 3/4 of an inch. So I wanted it to come down an additional 5 to 6 inches. And actually, you need to count your ribbing embellishment if you're going to do that. Now, for that matter, this could have been a dress, but it could have been as long as you want it. The thing about your ease here is you have to predetermine how many rows you're going to get or going to need. That's another consideration. Okay. I needed to add approximately 2 inches on each side. I ended up doing 3. but I needed minimum of 2, and I added 3 so that when I sit down, it wouldn't be tight. Okay. And the height of my individual row, let me do the hot pink one here, you can see it better. It's a little over 1/2 and not quite 3/4. Okay, each one of them. All right. So and also then measure the width. How many stitches is an inch? Because we're determining that we want how many inches of width added. All right, so it takes approximately 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and 4, maybe even 5 to be an inch. So we can add 1 to 1.5 inches per row. I would not go 1/2 though myself. I would only go maybe 1 1/4 inches per row to ease that amount in. So for me, I was adding 3 inches. So I added 1 inch in the first row that I increased, and then we have a row of double crochet in every stitch. And then in the third row, we have an increase again. You'll see I have 1 here, and I have increases then in this other row. I'm not seeing them right away, but they're there, I promise you. So you have a row where you make 1 to 1.5 inches of increase by increasing a stitch every so often. And then you have a row of double crochet 1 in every stitch. And then you have another row of increase. And then you have a row of double crochet in every stitch. And then another row of increase, like I have in this one. And then that row of every stitch. And then a row of increase again. And a row in every stitch. Okay? Now, I told you earlier that I actually got my daisy pullover a little wider than I wanted it, and this is what happened. So let me explain that, because you'll want to troubleshoot with that yourself. Whenever I joined my daisies, 4 daisies was 2 rows, needed 2 more rows in order for the pullover to come to the bottom of the panel of 4 daisies. So no problem. I didn't mind it being a little bit longer, so I added 2 more rows. But what I did was, in this first row, I did an increase again of 1 inch on each side. And so that made it 2 more inches. And so, regrettably, I did that. And then this next row is 1 double crochet in every stitch, just exactly the way I increased and added the ease up here. So that's the part that I wish I hadn't done, the increase row. I don't mind adding more length, but I didn't need the increase row to add more width to mine. So you see here, the number of rows that I used for my increase starts right here at the turquoise, not the green. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows for a total of 4 inches on each side. So I have a total increase in the width of my total garment from the bottom of the hexagon. I had an increase of 8 inches, and I only needed 3 inches on each side. Okay, but nonetheless, there again, it's a happy accident that happened, because that shows how those of us that have more voluptuous body, how much can be added. Now, if your chest size and your hips are more, then I only added 1 inch in each row. You may want to go to 1.5, because what happens as you continue to add rows, of course, it gets longer. and eventually it's going to be, you know, to your knees if you're needing too much. So you may want to play with that. Another thing is to consider, like I did, is your panel for your daisy square panel, how long that panel is. Now, if your tunic or cardigan, whichever you're doing, you may be doing a cardigan and just putting these in the back. That's great. I'm going to do one of those eventually. And so it could be because of the length of your hexes with the additional rows that you can get 5. Or you may 5 daisies. Or another option is to go back to the larger size that's a 6-inch square, and then it's going to be 6 inches long. That may be the better option, but be sure and allow for that different measurement. You'll have 3 inches for half of your daisy on the width of your hexagon. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to explain. Oftentimes for me, you can tell me verbally anything, but until I see it done, I may not understand it. I'm very much a visual learner, and that's why this visual arts are very much my thing. Okay, so let's get started. Now, another explanation. You can see already that my sweater is completed, and that's the way I do my filming. I film as I'm creating it, and then at the end, I show you the whole thing, and then I break it down into parts. But what happened was, part of my video, I don't know what happened to it. It disappeared, but I'm guessing. Sometimes I get so excited. I just get in here and I set everything up with my camera and everything and start going for it. You know, it really helps if you push the button to start the video. And I think that's what I did. I got so excited that I didn't say go, and I just went through the entire process with the increases without turning on my camera. Enough talk, let's crochet. I made a strip, and we're going to pretend that this is the end of my hexagons. And isn't it interesting, even on my actual project, and I just now noticed that, on my actual project, the last row of the hexagons is this aqua color. So, wow, another happy accident. Alrighty, here we go. Let me turn this to the correct side. You need to count your stitches in your last row. And your hexie is not sewn together yet. We're still working with 2 hexie halves. So you need to count your stitches in this row. And I know that mine has 60 stitches. And yours will be different. So whatever it is. And I already know that approximately 4 stitches is 1 inch. And I'm going to add 1 inch to each increase at a time. And your increase, remember, actually consists of 2 rows, because you have 1 row of increase with 1 inch of increase, and then the next row you have double crochets in each stitch. And then the next row you have 1 inch of increase again. And as I said, depending on the measurements, how much ease you need to add in this section, you can go up to 1 1/4, and if you really need to push it, 1 1/2 inches increase, but I wouldn't go over that because it will show. Your garment will begin to flare out like that, and it will show. If you ease it in gradually, no one's ever going to know that you even had to make it wider there. Because I like all of my stitches to look the same, I'm going to start with a standing double crochet on each row. That may not bother you. You can see on the strip that I made, this is the back side, and then, because I did turn it just to make this strip. But that's not the way my sweater is. My sweater is the right sides of the stitches all the way through it. You never see the back of my stitches. Now, that may not be of concern to you. And if you would like to do this step back and forth, that's not a problem. You make that design choice from the start and just be consistent with it. All right, so I'm going to start each row with a slip knot on my hook and do a standing double crochet in the first one. Okay, let's do the calculations. I already have 60 stitches in the bottom of my hexagon, okay? So I am going to add 4 stitches in this row, but I need to spread them apart. A good multiple is about every 15 stitches, because 15 times 4 is 60. But this first, if I just start here at the first one and count 15 and then do an increase, it won't end up 4 additional stitches, or it'll end up with that fourth one here at this side. At the end. I don't want my increase at the end because it will cause the end of the row to flare out. I want all my increases to be within the length of 60 stitches. And so my first stitch is going to be 7 stitches in, then I'll have an increase, and then I'll count 15, actually 14, and I'll count 14 again, and I'll count 14 again, and then I'm going to count 7 or 8. I'm not going to ever have an increase in the last stitch on either side. Remember that, because it flares. It will definitely flare out there, and then it's hard to get it in line whenever you attach your panel or your horizontal stitches, whatever it is that you're doing to join your 2 halves together. Okay, enough talk. Let's get to crocheting. I'm beginning with a standing double crochet. So we start with the slip knot on our hook and yarn over. Insert the hook into the top 2 loops of that first stitch, which was also a standing double crochet. And then we've got 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And that is a standing double crochet, and that is stitch number 1. Remember, we're going to count 7 and increase. This is stitch number 7 coming up. For newcomers, an increase is when you put 2 stitches into 1 stitch from the previous row. So here's my increase, 1 additional double crochet into the same stitch from the previous row. Now I'm going to count 14 and then have 1 other increase. And 14 and increase. Now I've added a 1/2 inch because I have 2 increases. Don't be concerned with this little hump here where you have the 2 stitches in 1. By the time you get through with all of the rows, in fact, by the time you put this next row on and have a stitch in the top of each stitch, that won't even be there. It straightens out. Okay, Let me do some yarn management. And now we're going to count 14 again. I start my count over 14 stitches. Your calculation, of course, I didn't say this explicitly, but again, I don't want to assume that you understood without being clear. Your calculation will be different based on, you know, how many stitches you had in here. If you had 70 or 80 stitches, again, you're going to add 4 to 6 stitches. Divide the number of stitches by the number of stitches you want to add, and that will tell you how far apart to put them. But one of those segments you need to half into and come in from the end with that half number. That's why with this first increase was at 7, because half of 15 is, well, 7 and then 8 in the other one. So that's why I came in, because this is going to be half of my first 15 stitches. And so I'm on number 3 now. I'm going to 14. Now I'm going to put my increase. And start my count again. And here I am at 14 again, and my last increase. And now just continue to the end of the row. And I'm at my last stitch. And it lines up perfectly. Now let me point out all my increases. Let me get a different color hook here. Here is the last increase right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So by adding 4 stitches to this round, it's going to increase my ease, and you see it kind of flares out a little bit, and that's okay because we're going to come in and show it who's boss with the next row of a double crochet in the top of each stitch. As I indicated before, if you're going to go back and forth, then right here you would chain up 2, turn your work, and then go into the next stitch. The chain up counts as your first stitch. You'll go into the top of the second stitch. I am going to tie off and pull up a loop. In fact, whenever I get ready to weave in my ends, I'll actually pull this out and I'll do an invisible. It's not a join, I'm not joining it to anything, but I'll make it invisible. I'm not going to have a knot there. But you know, I'm kind of weird about that. Once again, I'm going to have a lot of yarn tails here, and for me, it's hard to work with a lot of yarn tails. It drives me nuts. But I'm not going to take the time to weave those in at this time because I want to get you going. All right, so on the next row, again, I'm starting with a standing double crochet into my first stitch, which was also a standing double crochet. And need to get the knot from my slip stitch from the previous row. All right. Well, that didn't work. Let me start that again. And this is the way it is with standing stitches. Sometimes you gotta give it a go again to get it going. All right, pull that loop up. Pull your yarn tail over to the front and hold him there. Then you've got 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. Standing double crochet. Remember, this is the row we're going to have a double crochet in the top of each stitch. I'm not going to bore you with this all the way through. I'm going to come back whenever it's time to begin the next row, because that's going to be an increased row. We will increase another inch in that row and use the exact same method that we did on the previous row here. But I want to walk you through it one more time to make sure that we are mastering the concept. So I'll be right back with you whenever we begin the next row. Here we are. I've come with my row of increases at the bottom of my imaginary hexagon here, and then my next row was a row of double crochets in the top of each stitch. My next row is going to be an increase row. Therefore, I am going to have 4 stitches. I'm increasing by an inch. You may be going 5 stitches or 6 stitches maximum, depending on the width that you are working with. I'm working with now 64, actually I think I have 65 stitches in here, but I'm working with roughly 64 stitches. So I'm still dividing it into fourths because I am adding 4 stitches. I do not like for my increases to line up, so I'm going to come in, since I start a new row every time, if I just count over 8, then it's going to be lined up. And 14, and I don't like that. You do risk, if you have them in line, then you will get a bulge and a waviness to your rows. So I stagger them. So I'm going to count over 14 this time. And then I'm going to count over 14 again, and then 14, and then 14. So that mine don't line up. I already have my standing double crochet in my first stitch. I'm going to go into that second stitch with a double crochet, and I'm going to be counting 14 until I do my increase. Oh, all those yarn tails they don't want to lay down today. They want to stand up and get noticed. This is stitch number 14 and my increase. I'm going to count 14 again before my next increase. This is 14 and an increase. And then let's go over, that's our second increase. And let's go over 14 again. And here's 14 and increase. My last increase is right here. Let me count to see if I can just go 14. If I go 14, it's going to be 5 stitches in, so I'm going to go about 10. I don't want it that close to the edge, and I'll put my last increase in at 10 stitches. I didn't explain this. This is stitch 10. I'm going to put my increase in here. For someone that's crocheted as long as I have, it just stands to reason. But I don't want to assume that for my newcomers that you automatically understand that we can't put all 4 of those stitches together. When we do, that forms a shell stitch, which is another stitch, or a shell we call it. So that's why we don't just increase all 4 stitches in the in one stitch and just be done with it. I don't want to assume that anyone that's new to stitching would automatically know that. All right, and we are to the end of our row, and that is how you add width to ease over your hips if you need that. Some of you are so blessed that your body is proportionate and you don't need it. But that's not me, I tell you that for sure. And never has it been that way whenever, even as a teenager, before I had my more mature body shape. Yeah, my hips and my chest were not the same. Only Barbie has that, I think. All right, and here again, if you're turning and the next row is going to be a double crochet in the top of each stitch. If you're choosing to turn, just chain 2, turn your work, and go into the next stitch. I would not be doing that. I would be chaining 1, pulling up a generous loop of yarn. I pull up more than the width of the palm of my hand. That's how I judge. I just pull up a little bit more than that, and that gives me enough to do all of my weaving in. And that's the way it's done. I would do 1 more pair of consisting of an increase and then the double crochet 1 in each row. You want to end on a row of the double crochet 1 in each stitch. I said that wrong before. You want to end on one of those rows, not an increase row. The reason is it may have a tendency to make your, see where my increases are? Sometimes it bulges up a bit, and it may have a tendency to make your ribbing waffle there, and we don't want that. So you can see how the edge here is slightly going out. As I line it up with the planks on my background, then this is gradually going out, and that's what we want. We want that gradual increase rather than a radical increase like that. That's a different look. Okay, so that's the way that's done. You continue to add as many rows as you need to get the increase and the length that you want. If you needed to add 2 inches as I have done, but you still want 2 inches of length in your pullover, then you would just come in with your 2 additional rows of double crochet in the top of each stitch. I hope this helps you with your increases and your to increase your hip size, and also to add additional rows to add length to your hexagon, cardi, or pullover, whichever it is that you are making. Next up is putting our daisy squares, joining them together, and then joining that long panel to our pullover. We're to the place in our retro daisy pullover where our 2 hexagon halves are the correct width and length, and our sleeves have been joined at the shoulder. Now it's time for the last step on the main body of our garment, and that is going to be joining our daisies and then joining them to the 2 hexagon halves before we put our trim pieces on. I will be using the threaded yarn needle to do my join, and the way that we find how much yarn that we need for a small section like this is I have my needle threaded with yarn, and it is approximately, the tail is approximately the width of the area that I'm going to join. And then I pull 2 more of those lengths, and that should be a little bit more than enough, and I clip the yarn at that place. Now, even whenever you come to the long section of daisy squares, say you're doing 3 or 4 or even 5, I don't know what size and what length of garment you've decided to make, but even whenever you get to joining multiple squares, you're going to want to use more than one length of yarn rather than do one really long length of yarn. And it's because it's just unmanageable. The yarn becomes unmanageable, knots up. And also, if you get a knot in it, you don't want to have to take out a long area in order to redo it. Or say that it raveled out after you washed the garment. It's just better to have a smaller pieces in a long section so that it is more manageable, and if you have to repair it, it's a smaller area. Now, for the join that I'm going to do, we begin with the wrong sides together. And the loops that we're going to be in with to join the yarn is going to be on the front square that you're looking at. It's the back loop, this one right here. But on the back square, as you're looking at it, it's the front loop. But it's the same loop. If you turn this other square around, it's also the back loop. So in reality, you're joining into both back loops, but you're just looking at it differently. Now, this is the corner, and typically that would seem like the logical place to start. But I start 1 chain down, and the reason I do that is so whenever it opens up flat, it's in line with the outside stitch. If you come into this one, come into that one, whenever you lay it out flat, it comes in a little bit. And we want that edge, whenever we join it to the main body of our hexagons, we want that line, those stitches, to be straight. So I come out 1 more stitch to that one right there. In the corner, you had a chain 1, and so it's actually going to be the top of that second double crochet in the corner before the chain. All right, and then I pull through the yarn through, and you notice I don't have a knot in the yarn as you would if you were sewing, because we are not sewing, we are joining. And so then I bring the yarn around to the other side where I entered the first time, and I'm purposely going through the plies of the yarn. And I'm going to do it also on the other side, purposely going through the plies of yarn. And that's the way that we get our knot so it won't come out. And then we pull that snug but not tight. You don't want to pull it tight where it pinches the yarn and the 2 pieces. Now, because we're joining and not sewing, it is considered by most crocheters the better stitch to join is to come in, I come in the same stitch again. From the side that my yarn is coming out, I come in that same stitch one more time. And go slowly so that your yarn doesn't knot up. And then we come back into the next stitch, which is this one right here. And then I'm coming into that same stitch on the other side of the square. And pull the yarn through again. And go slowly so that it doesn't knot up. And back in the next stitch, all the way over. We're going to be going in an S motion. Pull it snug, but not tight. This particular join, considered by most crocheters to be better joined than a whip stitch. Whip stitch is a sewing stitch, and we are not sewing. We are joining. This stitch also is very difficult to pull so tight that it gathers up the crochet garment that you're joining, crochet fabric that you're joining. It's very difficult. In fact, if I get it too loose, I'll show you. If I get it too loose, and I'm going to purposely get it too loose here, and in the next stitch I'm going to get it too loose again. And then this next stitch I'm going to get it just right. And then this next stitch I'm going to get it just right also. And now I notice that these two stitches are too loose. And notice I can pull it, and it's pretty difficult to pull that through. But notice I've gotten it pulled through, but I don't have it gathered up. But also notice it's very difficult to keep going and like pull these stitches some more. It's only so far that it will go, and that you can correct it with this stitch. And that's why it's a good joining stitch, because it doesn't gather up the fabric, your crochet fabric. Whenever I'm looking on Etsy, very frequently I see garments where I don't know what kind of join that they've used, but it is gathered up on the blocks, and then the blocks bulge out like a little bubble, or they puff out. And it's I don't know for sure the reason, but one reason could be that the joins are too tight. And that's the way that we join in both back loops of a square. And I'll show you in a moment when we get to the end of this join, the way it looks when it's laid flat. I chose this particular join because even with the yarn threaded needle, we have all of these different choices of which loop, or if we want to go through all 4 loops, we don't have to go through the top. We can go through the sides. There's still all kinds of different joints. I chose this particular one because it is least visible and it is flat, and that's what I want on the front and back of my Retro Daisy pullover. Now, just like I did on the other side, I'm going to come down one more stitch. And on this side, it's that one. I'm coming down one more stitch in order to make sure that that join is straight. And I'm going to come through one more time, and I'm going to come around from the other side. No, I'm not, because it'll show. I'm going to come back through here, and I'm purposely trying to go through the pink yarn. Purposely trying to do that. And then back through again, purposely trying to go through the yarn all the way through to the other side. Again, purposely trying to get through the yarn, and that's how I'm going to finish off. Now I'm going to clip this yarn, but before I do that, I'm going to put it back down and onto the back, because whenever I weave this in, I'm going to weave it in through the back. Now I purposely joined with a color that kind of contrasts a little bit with my blocks, because my squares, because I want you to be able to see that join. But you see that it does show a little bit, but because mine on my actual garment is the yarn from my pullover, it just ends up being a little decorative stitch. But even with the pink, I don't think that looks bad. But I wanted you to be able to see it, and that's why I chose that. So when we clip this yarn, we will weave it in on the back. And that's the way it looks. And notice, even from the side, how flat it is. And it lays flat, and we got our edges pretty straight. That one I could have probably worked on a little bit more, but I'll be able to correct that whenever I join it to the pullover. So you'll want to use a join, whatever join you choose. If you're going to choose this same join, then do that and join as many squares as you need to fill your inset. Depending on the length of your pullover or cardigan, whichever you're doing, you will need whatever that number is. Join them at this seam to one another, this join to one another, and then we will join it in the same manner to the pullover. And that comes next. Now I have all my daisy squares joined, and I have one of my hexagon halves, and I'm ready to join that strip to that hexagon half to build my pullover sweater. Just like whenever I joined the squares, I'm going to put wrong sides together. This is the wrong side of my hexagon, and so I'm going to put wrong sides together. And by the time once I get to the actual hexagon half, then I will have the two back loops that I can stitch into. On this first block, it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm going to do the best I can to make it a very neat join and resemble the rest of the join. And that's the best you can do on this. All right, I'm going to join in the exact same manner. I'm starting at the bottom on purpose because I want to make sure that this edge right here is very even to start. So once again, I'm going to go into the back loop of my square, and I'm going to catch just one loop of the other side of my hexagon. I'm going to leave myself a little tail to weave in. I'm also, the yarn that was next on my polo stripe just happened to be the aqua, and I have a longer piece than I used with the little squares, but I may not use all of it anyway. And I'm purposely coming up. Once I did one pass of my yarn and needle, and now I'm coming back to go the same direction, and I'm purposely entering where that yarn is to push the needle through the plies of yarn, and that helps attach it so that it doesn't move. And then I'm going to pull it snug but not tight. One of the reasons is I'm going to put another edging on this sweater, and I'm going to probably have to come into this stitch or somewhere close to it. So I don't want to choke it up so much that I can't get back into it. And just like I did before, now the yarn is on this side, so I am going to come back through that from that same side to this side, and I'm just going to grab that one back loop on from the square panel that I'm adding. Okay, and then I'm going to come through the same way, going through that back loop. I'm going to go through the opposite way again, and then I'm just going to grab one loop of yarn from my hexagon. And then back again, just like a little snake, kind of. In fact, this may have that name. I don't know what this type of join is actually called, but as I said earlier, I was taught that it is the better join, and for the reasons that I already spoke of. Now here, I need to go into that stitch, but I'm almost coming, well, I'm going to do it anyway because that's where it lines up. It seems like I'm almost coming into the same loop from my hexagon, but I think there's some yarn, some thread ply, some yarn plies, so it won't go all the way through. That's what I don't want to happen. I don't want it to go all the way through. And then back here, and I just want to find one loop that's close. I don't want to go through too much and have some bulk here on this seam. Now on this one, what lines up with the stitch, I'm going to go through. There was so much hair in this yarn, and it's new yarn, and it's long black hair, and no one here has long black hair, and I don't have pets, so all right, I'll just go through there and we'll see what that looks like. Well, this part of the join is going to not be as neat and clean as the rest, just because you don't have the same stitches to go into. You can just do the best you can. And probably one of the solutions, now that I think of it, I didn't think of it before. Well, no, that wouldn't have been, I was going to say that one of the solutions might be to have had the yarn that was the color of the hexagon rather than the color of the square, but it really doesn't matter because it's a different color every inch or so, so I'm certainly not going to change out my yarn every inch or so, but you know, ideally if I was a high fashion designer or a couture designer, that might be what I would do, but not today, not today. Okay. This is a little work of wearable art, and this is the different colored stitch there is part of the design. I think for summer, this would be cute made in cotton or bamboo or hemp. Hemp sometimes can be kind of stiff and scratchy. And bamboo can be too, it depends. But another thing I thought about doing, I've used a 3-weight cotton and acrylic blend that I was able to wear in the summertime, and I thought that, and I can't remember the brand. In fact, I don't even know for sure. I'll have to see if I still have a label for that, because I'd like to get some of that. I've got another project in mind for summer that I think that yarn would work with. We'll have to see. I'll have to do a little research. Now then, I'm coming up to my hexagon. I want to remove this stitch marker. He has served his purpose well. Now I want to be able to see my stitches to go into only the back loop of that hexagon. This is on the corner, but I still have 2 loops, so I need to find the one that's the back loop. Remember from joining the squares that whenever you join both of your wrong sides together, that those 2 back loops then are beside one another and they're easier to see. Now you can do it the other way. You can put it with the right sides together. It's just a little bit of a different look, and you don't have as much of your stitches that show, but I don't mind this at all. So there again, you have that choice if you're making this along with me. When you join yours, you might want to see what the difference is whenever you join it the different way. All right, this was kind of getting the stitches are a little bit different size, although I did use the same hook all the way through. And basically that's it. I'm just going to continue to do this side, and then I'm going to grab the other side of the hexie and attach it to this, and then I'll go to the back and do the same thing. And you already saw me on the when I did the squares, you saw me tie off the yarn. So basically that's all there is to it at this point. And then I'll come back to you and I'll demonstrate how I'm going to put the decorative trim on it, and it's really going to make a difference in the way this, I mean, whenever we get these blocks on there, this is going to be a cute sweater. But I don't know, you don't know me too well yet. I'm a more is more person, so I'm going to have to go over the top and add a little bit more to it. So, and that'll be the trim, that'll be the last steps. So I'll come back to you when I'm ready to add the border trim. Once you complete this step, proceed to part 3, which is the border trim, ribbing, and surface stitching.